I want to thank all of you for joining us. And if you have any trouble finding a seat, just let us know and we will make sure that you can get seated. We want to welcome you to our panel on cultivating talent for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We will be exploring the importance and value of inclusive hiring. We will discuss two principal questions with respect to IDD hiring. First, what are the best practices for cultivating talent for those with IDD? Second, what are best practices for creating inclusion for all abilities in the workplace? And then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. A little bit about me. So I'm the CEO of the ARC Thrift Stores of Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. We are the largest funder of advocacy for people with intellectual disabilities in the Southwest region of the United States. We're the largest employer of people with intellectual disabilities in the Southwest region. 500 wonderful employees with IDD who help my company. So for those of you who might be new to IDD, intellectual developmental disabilities, typically are congenital disorders that occur before age 18. A common example is Down syndrome. I have a son with Down syndrome. It's the presence of an extra chromosome, chromosome 21. There are 350,000 individuals with Down syndrome in America. Another example is cerebral palsy. With cerebral palsy, there can be a deficiency of oxygen at birth. There are 500,000 people with cerebral palsy in America. And maybe the largest example is autism. There are now more than 1 million people with autism in America, and it's growing. There are 200 million people with IDD across the world. It's a very large population. And millions of these wonderful people are available for employment. So if you are with an organization or a company and you are focused on DEI and you're focused on inclusion, and if you do not have someone with IDD in your organization, you're not inclusive. You're not inclusive. So we're going to talk about how you can become inclusive and how you can, cultivate talent to help your organizations. Some factoids before I introduce the other panelists and have them answer some questions. According to the prominent consulting firm Accenture, companies who employ people with IDD experience increased innovation. They experience increased productivity, enhanced reputation of their organizations, increased public support, increased shareholder value, increased market share, higher revenue on the order of 28% higher than their peer companies without IDD employment, and profit margins 30% higher than companies that do not have IDD employment. So what can we attribute this to in IDD employment? What qualities do people with IDD bring to their organizations? I have a son with Down syndrome. He's 21. I've been involved in this field since his birth, and I have 500 employees with IDD. And I can tell you that the qualities that most strike me about my son and my employees with IDD are the following. People with IDD are almost always extremely authentic, extremely honest. They express a level of joy and gratitude, I think, at a higher rate than people who don't have IDD. They persevere despite challenges and obstacles they face in their life. They are unusually empathetic and compassionate. They find great meaning and purpose and fulfillment through their work in the workplace, and they see inclusion as a strength. So I encourage any of you who are considering IDD employment in your workplace or increasing IDD employment in your workplace to really think through some of the things you're going to hear from our panelists. And we're available to help as needed. We're available to help as needed. So we are going to start with having our panelists introduce themselves and then also answer the first of the two questions that I've asked. And we're going to start with Elizabeth Moran, who's going to introduce herself and talk about, in her opinion, what are the best practices for cultivating talent for individuals with IDD. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Actually, you can do better than that. Let's give her like a real round of applause. This is a tough crowd.
And you're a little spread out, so I'll try to do the tennis match pivot here. Thank you, Lloyd, for that introduction. Elizabeth Moran, I have the great honor of serving as the executive director of the ARC of Colorado. One of my board members is here. This is Jennifer Harris. And we are the state chapter of a 15-chapter network across the state of Colorado that provides advocacy services for families and individuals with IDD. And we also serve as the legislative and public policy arm of the ARC network. Lloyd talked a little bit in a very modest way about the ARC thrift stores, but the ARC thrift stores are the largest employer of individuals with IDD in our state, if not in our region. I would argue probably pretty close to the top across the nation. So when you donate and you shop at ARC thrift stores, that creates revenues that supports all of the incredible programming that ARC Thrift Stores has. I know you'll probably talk more about that, around not just job skills, but life skills and relationship and capacity building and the importance of that. Money that is left over then gets allocated out to our chapters, which makes us 100% privately funded, which is a really beautiful thing because that means, one, we're not at risk right now of losing our funding, but two, it makes it so that we can actually do the hard work that is needed without worrying about whether or not what we are saying or advocating for might be otherwise restricted by a government agency or a government policy. It's really quite amazing, and all of our services are free to Coloradans with IDD in our state. There's my shameless plug. Your question, I want to best practices. My most important role, by the way, is probably as a sibling. I have a 62 going on 63-year-old sister who has a developmental disability, who has been employed most of her life. She stopped working in her early 50s, but I will tell you that was not the result of not wanting to work, and it wasn't because she couldn't have worked and been if she was in the right environment, but it was because she suffered a sexual assault. And I don't know if you know much about folks who have any kind of a diminished capacity, their disability is related to communication or cognitive disability, they are somewhere between 6 to 10 times higher risk of experiencing that. And that set her back quite a long way, and she just wasn't ever able to bounce back. That being said, I'm going to talk a whole lot about what I think made her successful as an employee. When you ask people about my sister, she was always early to work, always early to work, sometimes more than an hour early to work, and she would wait because she was eager to please, she was eager to get it right, she was eager to learn. She's known as being a hard worker, but let me tell you what I think helps make it successful. She did require what we call effective communication supports. So one of the things that I think helps make employment environments successful for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is ensuring that they are able to be communicated to and that they are able to express and engage in communication in meaningful ways so that they are not misunderstood, or that to ensure understanding from them, but also just recognizing that folks who are non-traditional communicators, it doesn't mean that they are unable or incapable of doing the work or incapable of understanding. It just means we haven't figured out yet how to engage them in a meaningful way. The other thing, you talked about increased innovation. I want you to think about this, because I think one of the keys is creating a culture that embraces diversity and embraces the idea that different is not less than, right? And so when you think about what kind of culture do you want to build, whether that's you as an employer, you as an employee, what kind of culture do you want to work in, and what are the things you can do as a leader, not a leader in a position, but leadership as an activity in your own work environments to ensure equity and inclusion. What do you want your workplace to look like, right? So I always tell people we are all one slip and fall, one head injury, one medical event, one car accident away from being the person who's going to need some services and supports, or some effective communication, or an opportunity, right? What kind of a workplace, changing hearts and minds, do we want to work in? Because I really think it's about culture. It's about building a culture that is inclusive and equitable when it comes to engaging meaningfully in communication. And I'll pause there.
Okay, I want to introduce Stephanie Ingalls, who has a wonderful program including assisting people in employment on the job and helping them find jobs. And Stephanie, introduce yourself and then answer the question, what do you believe the best practices are for cultivating talent for people with IDD?
Great. Hello. Okay, it's on. Hi, everyone. As Lloyd said, I'm Stephanie Ingalls, co-founder and executive director at Revel. I have worked with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities for the last 25 years in the Colorado area. And 9 years ago, co-founded Revel, really to focus on the teen and adult population. We support individuals in a variety of different ways, employment being a big portion of that, but really helping people figure out their paths and their passions and bridging that gap into adulthood through the lifespan. And something that we've really been focusing on in the employment realm is working, of course, with individuals and also working with employers and revamping our own internal practices with what we're doing. And I think a big part of what has to happen is a shift in thinking around what potential looks like, what employment looks like across your organization. So making sure that you're identifying the best person for the job, not the person who interviewed the best. And that requires making sure your job descriptions are really specific. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at what those look like. A lot of times you'll see things like must have excellent written and verbal communication skills. For a data entry position or stocking shelves position, that's really not at the top of the list of the priority of what those skills would need to be for that job. So ensuring your inclusive hiring practices are up to date, you're hiring for what you're looking for, and you're interviewing in that way as well. I would encourage people to think about the interview practices that you do. A lot of interviews are conversational and we're just talking to each other and answering questions. It's important to also allow the person to demonstrate the skill and not rely on communication only. You spoke about culture. I think that's a huge part too, to really examine what your culture looks like and what is important for your values and what's being brought out in the organization. Someone may seem like a really great culture fit, but maybe they're more of a great social fit, like you want to hang out with them after work and not necessarily a fit for your culture. I encourage everybody to kind of look at those areas and ensure that at the end of the day, you're implementing best practices across the board.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm now going to ask Janet Foos to introduce herself. And Janet manages our employment program at my company, 500 employees with IDD, and does a lot of work in helping people when they're first hired and cultivating their talents on the job so that they can be successful in our company.
This one works. Good morning, almost afternoon, everybody. As Lloyd said, my name is Janet Foos. I've been with Arc Thrift Stores for 7 years. My first few years with Arc Thrift Stores was working in the volunteer program, where I was able to learn a lot about our ambassador program because a lot of our ambassadors that we hire come from our volunteer program. I have been in the director of ambassador programs for the last 3 years, and it's been my pleasure to be able to help grow that program. The program that we have at Arc Thrift Stores is an already established solid foundation that has been a part of Arc for over 20 years. But it's grown and it's changed and it's been modified based off of community needs, differing people coming into the workforce. So what we've done over the last 3 years is kind of tried to figure out how to include more individuals that are working in our stores. Some of our stores have 6 to 12 people with disability, IDD working in them. Some of them have 20. And not all ambassadors want to be a part of the programs, but the culture, and I would have to agree, the culture that is built has to be foundational and then consistent. So the one thing that is very consistent at Arc Thrift Stores is the standards that our store management teams, our corporate management teams, led by Lloyd, the expectations that we all embrace people with IDD. They're a part of our culture starting from the first day that they volunteer, if they're from Rebel, because that's the other thing, is building these relationships in the community will help you get the people that you need hired and cultivate them from the community, because not everybody wants to work at Arc Thrift. Not everybody wants to go into a store and have the same type of jobs. So you find the right fit. And one thing that I've learned through the culture that's being created and modified as we go is that if somebody doesn't fit in one position, the store management, as well as our HR department, myself, and the district managers, we work to find out where that person fits. So maybe they've been working in a face-to-face customer position, and that might not be the right fit for them. So the partnering with the community is there's job coaching agencies, there's DVR agencies, Division of Vocational Rehab. There are individuals that are inside the community that will help you make that person who's in front of you the best person that they can be. They help you. And I call it magic, because when you walk into a store and you have individuals that are working in our bins, pulling things off of our shelves, getting them into recycle, they know their job matters, and they do show up on time. They show up early. They're excited. They come to our ambassador programs excited because we create these social events for them. So all of that's part of this culture that cultivates a place where some of them have been there over 20 years. Most of them have 5 years at the minimum. There's very few, and when we do get individuals hired, they feel so welcomed. And it's not just by me. So if you think about my position, there's 500 ambassadors. There's one of me with about 15 to 20 other corporate individuals that help us. Where the magic happens is in the store. Where the magic happens is where they're actually working face to face. They have buddies within the store. That's a system that's been in place always at ARC. So that's somebody that they can go talk to if they have a question, if there's something that they need. That's part of this foundational piece as well. Not only that, but they have store managers that support our mission. We all know that our funds go to support people that have IDD. But right in front of you, you have somebody that you're actually supporting that has IDD. There's nothing more rewarding than to see them be successful. And know that if they have a problem, which I got a call last night at 6 o'clock from a young man who's concerned about another ambassador, that he's like, she's afraid to call you. And I said, okay, tell her tomorrow, I'll call the district manager. What we're going to do is figure out a plan to help her feel successful, how to help her through this situation. And that is what we've done and has been done since way before me, because my prior experience was at retail at King Soopers. I've only been there 7 years. But you embrace that culture and you realize that this culture that has been created at ARC works. And you don't try to change it, but you do try to help support it. So the best thing that I can say is that look for people in your community that want to fit into your work environment. My daughter works at a school system. She was a transitions coach for about 15 years. Go to the high schools. Go to the transitional programs. Many of those programs are looking for places to place their kiddos, as my daughter calls them. We know they're not kiddos, they're trying to become adults, right? They're trying to get transitioned into the workforce. It's a great resource to look there, as well as your local agencies, DVR, Human Services, Rebel. There's many agencies that you can work with in tandem. If they need a job coach, they'll give you a job coach. If they need a job assessment and a placement, those are all things that we were working with through our volunteer program. So those are some highlights of what we've done and how I've been able to support at ARC.
So if what I've said and some of what you heard sounds a bit vague, and you're trying to determine how does this really benefit a company, I can tell you by my own business experience. I mean, I had a long private sector career. I was with IBM. I was in investment banking, etc. But in my company, in its 37th year, when I became the CEO, we were doing all of $2 million in earnings. $2 million. We've had 19 of 20 record years, other than COVID, during my tenure. We're now doing 20 million. We're doing nearly 150 million in revenue. And I attribute half of our success to our employment program for people with IDD who love to contribute, love to work in teams, are very positive employees in the workplace. What Accenture described in my earlier remarks in terms of benefits to companies, real tangible financial benefits, that is real. That is real, and that's a compelling reason to do this. And if I were to give you my own answer on what are the best practices for cultivating talent for individuals with IDD, I would give you the Lloyd answer, which is hire them. Hire them. Find a job that matches their skills and interests. Have people available to mentor them and work with them and help them with their jobs. But when you hire people with IDD, you will be extremely impressed in how they grow as employees, how they grow as human beings, and how they blossom in the workplace, and how much it means to them and to their families. And the best way to cultivate that talent is just to get started, just to hire somebody, and then watch them grow as you help them. We've seen that over and over in my company. We're now going to go around the horn on the second question, and I'm going to ask Elizabeth to describe what are the best practices for creating inclusion for all abilities in the workplace.
All right, so I'm going to go back to my answer around effective communication. You've hit a little bit, Lloyd, on needing a mentor, someone to work with them, and it needs to be someone who is willing to engage in communication with them in whatever way they need. I want to back up a little bit on best practices. One of the things you had talked about DVR, Janet, a little bit. Some colleagues and I were just before this meeting standing out in the hall talking about how underutilized DVR services are. And these are just rough statistics. There are approximately 11,000 Coloradans who qualify for DVR, the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation services. Let me give you an example of some of those services that I think are I would encourage you to tap into or look into around best practices to build your team of folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. So one of the things that they do is they do group job development, they do group job skill training, they also do individual development and skill training. I'll give you an example. I was trying to work with a young man who had cerebral palsy to hire him as a part-time employee at my organization. We didn't end up hiring him, but let me tell you what that process was, because it wasn't because he wasn't talented, it was a timing issue. But he worked through DVR, and DVR was able to help him with some individual training, skills development, how to be responsive to phone calls and texts and emails, how to schedule his time appropriately, how to show up, how to schedule reliable transportation, how to get there, how to process and receive feedback, how to express when he was having trouble with something or experiencing something challenging or had questions, how to understand appropriate and or inappropriate relationships between colleagues at work. And in addition to all of that individual training, they also covered his salary for the first 90 days of employment. That's a win-win. That's a win for you, either as an employer or employee who's trying to encourage your organization to be inclusive, to embrace that value, because then they sort of get to test the waters to see if it's a good fit for them. You get to test the waters too, to try to say, what supports can I put in place to make this make it so that individual can fulfill the job responsibilities, right? But it's largely untapped, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I have to look it up, but it was less than 100 people, less than 100 out of 11,000 who are getting individual development and skills training. That can't be right. So we need to be tapping into some of those resources a little bit more. Best practices. Stephanie, you talked about job descriptions and interviews. So I want to go back to my effective communication piece. I'll use my sister as an example. So because I think this is a best practice. My sister was applying for a company called Minor Container Company, and it was mostly a factory job, where she would pull things off and put things back on. What do you call those things? Conveyor belt, thank you. My sister would not have been able to apply for that job by herself. She needed some level of support. So, and that communication support at the time was my mom. So I think it's important for us to embrace that sometimes people need a person to help them. And it doesn't mean my sister wanted her mommy with her to go to work. It doesn't mean that my sister needed mom with her to do the actual thing that was listed in the job description as this is the skill set we're looking for. What it meant was that my sister needed another person there who knew her well, who understood what she did or did not understand and how to help her communicate in order to just apply for that job, to interview for that job, right? She had the skill set. She was a hard worker. I think I shared with you earlier, she always showed up early. She was dependable. It was really important for her to get things right. But one of the best practices that you can embrace, or if you're an employee, encourage your company to embrace, is that we have different levels of capacity and communication, and we have to be willing to embrace sort of the non-traditional. And when you are posting those job descriptions, please make sure they are in plain English, because we like to use a lot of sort of popular words, right? Ambitious or team-centric, or right? And those words won't mean a whole lot for folks who need those descriptions in plain English, or they need that communication support to explain, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Yeah, and then also, again, a culture of, I love what you said, that everyone embraces the culture of this is an equitable, inclusive environment, and that's where I think it starts. I think it starts with setting the value at everyone is welcome here, everyone is valued here, and we are going to support you in whatever way is needed to make sure you are able to fulfill those job responsibilities.
So Stephanie, your thoughts on best practices for creating inclusion for all abilities in the workplace? Maybe a couple of quick comments. We want to leave time for questions.
Great. It's really not about checking a box. It's about really embracing change in your organization. Starting with your staff training, there's actually a really great video. It's called Disability Sensitivity Training on YouTube. We share that with all of our individuals when they're onboarded. It goes through, it's about 6 minutes long, but it'll give you just some information on disabilities and how to support that within the workplace. Some general do's and don'ts. Then having your policies in place. Self-disclosure, some people may want to disclose their disabilities, some people may not. If they do disclose, then they can also have accommodations. When accommodations are put in place, you have to be able to follow up on them. So knowing who in your organization is going to follow up on those accommodations, evaluating if they're actually working or supporting the person, and having those steps in place, I think can be really helpful. Also, yes, inviting individuals with disabilities, if they have disclosed, to participate in creating those policies, to get their input as well. And for individuals that aren't comfortable disclosing their disability, then you can just implement practices that are helpful for everyone. Having visuals up, providing agendas before meetings to allow for processing time, allow people to have notes during their meetings ahead of time. So just anything that can go for anyone in your organization that's really helpful. So not requiring someone to self-disclose, but just putting those practices in place regardless of disclosure.
Janet, your quick answers?
My quick answers, which I'll just add to what everybody else has said. On first interviews, first days, be very basic, be very clear, and wait for the individual that's in front of you that's applied for a job to answer. Or if they have somebody with them, help them, because they're nervous. Think about your job interviews and your first days, your first weeks. It's the same for anybody. They're nervous. But also keep in mind when you've set something for most individuals, and it's not all, if it's 10 to 2, keep it 10 to 2. because that's very important. If it's 3 days a week, keep it to 3 days a week, 10 to 2. This is what you're going to be doing. And then as they start developing in their role that you have them in at your job place, make sure that you're asking them questions on how's it going? Do you like your job? Those are just the basic things that you're going to find out, that you're going to get to know that individual a little bit more. The other best practice that I can't say enough that is very important is the buddy. Whoever that is in your buddy mentor, we call it the buddy program, is assigned right away. They know who that individual is because if they need to know how to go to the restroom. So what you're creating is this environment where they feel like they're at work and they can be worked and they're accepted. That's the biggest thing. And then just that constant coaching and then follow up afterwards on how they're doing. Hey, you did a great job today. Look at all the melons that you did. A melon is no, a yellow. Let's say a yellow. It's a basket where they're taking product off. How much did you get done today? And if they don't know, say, hey, guess what? This is what you got done today, and this is how it helped us help our customers. Tie it back to how important they are so they understand that their different abilities don't cause them not to be successful in their job or that they're a hindrance. They're actually helping. And I would say just, again, we do performance reviews. Just one example, a young lady was tired of working on the floor and asked to be a cashier at one of our stores. Now that she's a cashier, that's all she talks about. I'm a cashier, so don't be afraid to change what they're doing, and then, of course, just recognize the value that they bring.
Thank you, Janet. So we're going to be concluding, but we want to take your questions and comments. I just want to follow up on something that Elizabeth said earlier about our stores and about the opportunity to donate and shop and what it supports. So to accommodate all of you, a bus will pull up at the end of this presentation and take you to our nearest store. That's a lame joke. That's a lame joke. Don't take that as serious. But also, by the way, we have a car donation program. If you throw your keys on the table, we will take care of that. We will take care of that. We want to thank you for attending today. We know you all have busy lives and busy occupations. And my answer to the best way to create an inclusive environment is hire people with IDD. Be models for other people. I once spoke at a World Down Syndrome Congress at the United Nations on a panel on IDD employment. In the audience were hundreds of family members of people with IDD. And I thought, well, they traveled to New York and they've spent all this money to attend this. I asked that group, how many of you are managers in your company? Most hands went up. My next question was, how many of you have hired someone with IDD? Very few hands went up. So be models for others and preach this to others in your work. Now, if you have questions of me or the other panelists, just raise your hand and we'll give you the mic.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Stephanie, you talked a little bit about job position descriptions, those kinds of things changing. Talk a little bit about, because I think it starts from when a person with a disability applies for a job, that has an impact on culture, particularly the job posting. I was working with a young man with cerebral palsy, and a part of the job posting said they must be able to stand for 4 to 6 hours, but he could actually do the job. And I don't think employers realize when they're putting a job posting out there, words matter, language matters. And so if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question, and that's exactly the point. Words matter. So do you really have to stand to do this job? Do you have to lift 40 pounds over your head? Do you have to have excellent written communication skills? Really going line by line in all of your job descriptions and striking anything that doesn't need to be in there for that role, or being really thoughtful about your words, standing or just sitting is fine, or accommodations, what accommodations can be included, but really be thoughtful about the words that are in your job description.
Other questions or comments?
I need to get my steps in, so I'm kidding. I have a question then. First, thank you for not only your insights, but also the courage to talk about it, especially having family members. I work with an organization in Miami, the Demoya Foundation. And one of the things that we're working on, obviously, is creating that culture that you just talked about, on not only for making sure we have the individuals included, but also making sure the employees that they're working with understand it. So is there any work around how do we make sure that employers and their employees are ready to include these amazing individuals that's coming to do great work with us?
In my company, I think it started with me putting in this program and modeling for my employees and managers that this was important. This was an important part of our company, and that we would be hiring people with intellectual disabilities, that we would be finding jobs that fit their skills and interests, and we would be supporting those employers. You know, nothing substitutes for the top person in a company or top people in a company modeling for other people on how to embrace this kind of employment. So I would encourage all of you to do that in your organizations and to do that in the organizations in which you participate. And I also want to make this comment that I talked about the financial performance of my company after embracing IDD employment and how much of a difference it's made in line with the Accenture study findings. I want to talk a little bit about what it can do for the reputation of a company. With my company and our IDD employment program, we've been singled out in the congressional record. We've received a World Citizenship Award from the International Civitans. We've received a Civil Rights Award. We've been recognized by the Denver Business Journal. You know, it makes a difference when you make a difference in other people's lives. And that's a big reason to do something like this.
Thank you for being here. So glad to see all of you. But with educational leaders and knowing what's going on in education right now with so many of the different things that are being cut, what are other things that organizations like Global Minded can do with those leaders to keep awareness for communities, for parents, and for those students themselves who may not be as covered in the next 5 years as possibly they've been in the last few years?
We do a lot of work with educators. We do a lot of work with schools and student programs, volunteering programs, transitional programs. We have a young lady here who we provided an academic scholarship as she works in her PhD in the field of IDD. And,
Awesome.
you know, there's a lot that we can do. Elizabeth, do you want to make a few comments on that?
Yeah, I want to make, I lost the speaker. She was asking about, you were asking about, I'll come back, I promise. Just really quick, I wanted to just dovetail off what Stephanie talked about earlier about having disability competency training at the top, and most importantly, making sure the people who are doing the training have lived experience. The person who has a disability, the family member, the support person, the mentor, the buddy, to talk, because that gives it context. Having a training is one thing, but then when you hear from your now colleague or your friend or your, maybe it's a colleague who has a family member who has an intellectual or developmental disability, and you give it context, real life, I think that helps folks better understand and appreciate the importance of equity and inclusion, the importance of when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're not leaving out people with disabilities, and not just the disabilities that we can see, but the disabilities we can't see, and then better understanding what their needs are, for whether that's for support, for communication, for mentorship, whatever that looks like. Because I really do believe that disability has largely been sort of left off the equity conversation when we talk about, you know, liberty and justice for all, when we talk about life and the pursuit of happiness for all. What does that look like? Understanding that all of us could at any moment be part of that group of people who identify as a person with a disability or with a loved one with a disability. So I do think the competency training is really, really important for employers to help shift that culture change that where when we talk about equity, it really is all. So I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, now back to I'm not an expert on what we're going to do with all the funding that's getting cut. It's a huge problem because it's across the board. It's our Department of Education. It's, I don't know if you all know this, but the Department of Education has what's called the Office of Civil Rights, and that's who processes most of the discrimination cases in our country, in our state, around discrimination in our education system, right? I think our school systems have come a long way toward equity and inclusion, and I also think they have a long way to go. I think all of us subscribe to the ultimate goal is to eliminate the us-them mentality, right? It's we, and then we do whatever we need to do to make sure everyone is included and supported. And
well, and let's conjoin our networks, because I think, we had Sean here from AASA, who runs urban superintendents. He's at Howard. He's connected with our AASA leaders. Like, there's leaders of leaders groups across K-12, and I think we need to conjoin that more fully in ways that are meaningful. And I hope we can help you with that with partners that we work with.
Oh, I do too. And I think that's what's going to be key is all of us working together toward those common goals.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you for the very simplistic, small steps that internally, if we're not leadership, I'm with SUNY Empire, which is State University of New York, and we are an online institution. We're taking all sorts of students, and we are making strides towards making everything accessible to all populations. And that's going to be a process. It's going to take time. But the small steps that each of you gave today are takeaways, how we can start building and supporting it from bottom up. And so I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again. I think they are now serving lunch. And another thing you can do, by the way, is just hire people and ask for forgiveness later. And just sneak somebody into your payroll, right? Just say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to get the approval. All right, good to see everybody. Oh, sure.
I see $1 billion in